So let's go ahead and get started in the interest of time, and just wanted to quickly do some some background information on myself. I'll do a little bit more of background when we get to introduce the panelists. But my name is Patrick Driscoll. I have been part of Start Out now for about 2 years, so entering into my 3rd year, and am really excited to be part of the investor community as part of Start Out. And we wanted to do this panel breaking into VC for the LGBTQ plus community, because personally, I know how difficult it has been to break into the VC ecosystem. I speak with folks all the time about how difficult it is. So the idea around this panel came together quite quickly, and we wanted to make sure that it added as much value to our kind of queer community as much as possible. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Start Out is. So if we can get to the next screen. So yeah, Start Out's mission is to increase the number, diversity, and impact of LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs and amplify their stories to drive the economic empowerment of the community. So as Start Out has grown, we have noticed a large growth kind of in the amount of investors within the ecosystem, right? So we decided, why don't we start offering education and programs specifically for investors? So not just entrepreneurs, but also investors, and we could bridge the gap between the two to really help catalyze this ecosystem that we're all a part of. Next slide. So Start Out's growing quite quickly. We have the only LGBTQ accelerator, the Growth Lab, with 44 graduated companies that have raised over 300 million in funding, with a ton of new jobs created. Some great mentorship programs if you are a founder or you are interested in mentoring. That's a great way to build your expertise in VC. I recommend getting involved. You can mentor some cool startups from all over the world. There's a ton of different experts in the ecosystem that focus on fundraising, marketing, etc. There's an investor portal as well, so you can get involved at an investment level. And then a ton of great connections can be made in private online forums. So it exists as a platform, right, to get to know one another. And then these great events like this one. So we're crushing events. We did really well last year in terms of COVID, and our numbers are growing exponentially this year. We expect to have even more growth, and we have seen a lot of social media impressions to inspire these entrepreneurs all over the US and even the globe. Just wanted to shout out our sponsors. If anyone is in the audience who is curious about sponsorship, feel free to let us know. And yeah, thank you so much to all of these wonderful organizations for really supporting the LGBTQ plus entrepreneurship space. Great. So now I wanted to introduce the folks who are the reason why we're all here. Before we do that, there is a poll that was just launched, and I wanted to know where folks are in terms of their VC path. So you can indicate you're curious about VC and investing, you're a founder looking to pivot, that's oftentimes the case. You're actively applying to VC jobs, currently work in VC in an investor role, or currently work in VC in an ops role. So feel free to indicate what stage you're at while we introduce ourselves, and I asked the panelists to introduce themselves. So my name is Patrick Driscoll. I'm the venture lead for BMNT, which is a government innovation program. I was brought on to manage a portfolio of startups. We provided non-dilutive capital to each of them, about $1 million, and manage that portfolio of 20 companies. I now manage a program with the Norwegian government and Norwegian stakeholders, with 8 great companies that are trying to break into US markets. So a lot of startup ecosystem building. I'm also a venture partner for Gangels, which is the LGBTQ plus syndicate, and love sending deals over to them and being part of that ecosystem. Then this whole Start Out, I've last 2 years chaired various boards for Start Out. So I'm super thrilled to be a part of this event and Start Out for 2022 as well. Next up, I'd like to introduce Kelly O'Connell. So I'll pass it off to you, Kelly, to introduce yourself, since you can do it best.
Thanks so much, Patrick, and thank you all for joining in. Absolutely exciting to see so many of you with an interest in learning more about how to break into VC. My name is Kelly O'Connell. I'm the managing partner of 360 Venture Collective. We're an emerging venture firm based out of Miami, Florida, led by 3 female lesbian GPs, investing in historically underrepresented founders, building venture scale tech-enabled impact companies. I'm also the co-chair for the Start Out Investor Board, along with another one of our panelists here, and really looking forward to today's conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. Next up, we have Ben Stokes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Stokes. I am the founding partner of Chasing Rainbows, which is a pre-seed fund that specifically invests in underrepresented founders, namely LGBTQ+. I also co-chair the investor board along with Kelly. So it's great to be able to be on a panel with her and to be able to discuss, what it is like to move into VC. I was an entrepreneur myself, so I've got that entrepreneurial background. I was actually part of the Growth Lab as well with my company Social Table.
Excellent. We'll do actually Marc Bouchet afterwards.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Marc Bouchet. I'm an analyst with TDK Ventures. We're an early stage deep tech corporate venture capital fund. Prior to this, I was with Plug and Play Ventures, even earlier stage investing, more family office style. So I've kind of navigated the I guess growth path within VC from kind of the team perspective and joining various investing teams. And personally, my background's in aerospace engineering, and it's been a little bit of a winding path to get into venture. So I'm happy to answer some of the questions that we have for you all on the panel, and then hopefully get in some Q&A and share my knowledge.
Awesome. And then finally, we have Sarah Millar with Diversity VC. And if we can go to the next slide as well, as Sarah talks.
Hi, everybody. I have a bit of a longer, not intro, but a little bit of a longer diatribe to go on here. So my name is Sarah. I am a former VC. I worked at an institutional fund called City Light Capital for about 5 years, just made the move over to the operating side. While pursuing some angel investing and kind of building my own thesis. But in all of my spare time, I run a nonprofit called Diversity VC, which is focused on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the venture capital ecosystem in particular. And we have a program called Future VC, which I wanted to get in front of everybody today. And thanks to Patrick for kind of pulling all of this together and letting me go on this little advertisement here. But Future VC, and I'll drop some links in the chat so that folks can learn some more information. But effectively, we facilitate an internship program for underrepresented talent in the industry, where we will place the candidates into 8-week paid internships at VC funds around the US. And we actually also have a presence in continental Europe, the UK, and Latin America. I'll drop all the links to the applications in there. But it's really focused on building the next era of venture capitalists and making sure that those VCs reflect the fabric of society. And so it's a paid internship with a VC fund, but we kind of layer on a curriculum of a crash course in venture capital that covers everything from financial modeling to term sheets, but also career building, how to have hard conversations, for example, and of course, the kind of peer-to-peer learning through the cohort. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll drop the information in the chat, but excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now we can stop sharing the screen and we get the results as well. This is great. So curious about VC and investing. The majority of folks, founder looking to pivot in close second. Actively applying is about 10 folks and currently working VC. And then currently working VC in an ops role. I myself found myself in VC in an ops role for a long time, trying to break into the investment community. So glad to know there's at least one other person in that situation. So great. I think this will help set the stage for where these questions and responses will get to. Now, the first question I want to provide or ask is back to you, Sarah. I know that there's a deadline quickly approaching for Future VC, and I was curious if you could talk about next steps for these folks as they go to that link. And then if you have any success stories or can talk about any folks that have gone through the program already.
Sure. So the applications do close on Sunday. And so the application only takes about 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how long you want to spend on it. We have a completely blind application process. And so we do not see, when we're reviewing your applications, the name, the gender, race, any personally identifiable information is totally stripped off of the application. We're only evaluating the answers to 4 questions. And there's a rubric that will guide you through exactly how to answer those questions. But it's really things around, what's a company that you're interested in, why, and tell us about a time that you had to face a challenge and how you went about that. And so it's really meant to get to who you are rather than what you have done, which is why we've seen several success stories of folks coming in from really non-traditional paths into the industry. And I can speak to probably one example from last summer. We had a candidate who had worked in oil and gas for her 4-year career, and she really decided to take the leap and take this internship with no guarantee of a full-time offer after the summer. And she was placed at a fund here in New York City where she really came up the learning curve very, very quickly, and demonstrated that she had expertise in an area that the fund had not really had exposure to in the past. And it was really an asset for her to come in and say, you guys have been doing VC for 15 years. I'm coming from oil and gas. Let me tell you about some of the things that I'm seeing that can be helpful. And she was actually offered a full-time position at the end of that internship. And so do want to caveat that is not the typical or promised outcome, but it is definitely seen. And we have more than 500 alumni of this program at this point, a very large amount of which are currently working in VC, and many of which have actually gone on to start their own funds or start their own companies that have received venture investment. So happy to talk more about it, but I'll stop there.
Hopefully an outcome of this event is just a flood of folks from the LGBTQ plus community breaking into VC via your program. We can just inundate the market with our allies. Next up, I'd love to pose a question to Marc. So I know you recently started at TDK Ventures, which is a deep tech fund, but before that you were at Plug and Play. So can you talk a little bit about how you either broke into Plug and Play, how that led to your TDK Ventures, basically about your background and how you were able to break in?
Yeah, definitely. I want to almost latch on to 2 things that Sarah just mentioned for the candidate that I ended up placing with the fund. Is there are 2 things that stood out to me that I really identified with. One is this person clearly found out their unique value add, right, for the funds that they were joining. And then they were also willing to learn and just kind of have the entrepreneurial mindset of joining a team, trying to get up to speed as fast as possible and just figuring out where they were able to kind of contribute. I think that's been pretty consistent with my experience because I do have like a non-traditional background to venture investing. I do not have a professional financial kind of history behind me. My undergrad was in aerospace engineering, and I think what I found going into VC, going into Plug and Play for my first role, I can speak more specifically to how I got that job, but the unique value add was that they were looking for somebody to help them with diligence on more technically kind of foundationally technical companies in the automotive, like mobility, electrification space, because that's where we were looking to invest at the time. And my going joke was that they didn't have anyone to differentiate between kilowatts and kilowatt hours, which, and maybe a bit of a technical joke, but like it was literally like people didn't know the difference between energy and power, which are at least 2 conceptually pretty different things. So that was literally my unique value add at the very beginning, was like I could help them, kind of cut through a lot of the founders that they were talking to and identify which ones had potential from a technical perspective. And then I also kind of committed to just like understanding that the biggest joy in this job is being able to learn, right? So you do have to kind of come into it with that mindset of like really like enjoying the process of learning, because it's made me uncomfortable a whole bunch of times. And I think, being out of my depth and realizing that like, okay, this is really about listening and learning from entrepreneurs and trying to assimilate, what I can from that. So, and yeah, those 2 things were definitely hit home. Specifically how I got into Plug and Play, my first kind of investing role or investing related role was, I think through something that we'll probably talk a lot about this, like through this whole conversation, is kind of the notion of like your network and your connections. I didn't particularly have like a network in VC, but from college, my undergrad, I did a lot of like more entrepreneurial type like business plan competitions with friends, and just like kind of projects with friends that were on the fringes, like like in Cleveland. And I had some friends who ended up actually going to Y Combinator kind of post college with the startups that they were working on. And so they kind of put the bug in my ear around potentially thinking about investing. We'd always been talking about like, oh, like, Mark, would you want to start your own company, or would you want to try and do something on your own? And I've never really had that kind of, at least not yet, that spark of starting my own thing. So my friend Prince, put me on to the idea of the investing side of things. And ultimately then I combined that with, okay, like, where am I differentiated? It's more on the technical side. And I ended up reaching out to Plug and Play, and it was definitely a match that was made like for someone with the background that I was coming in with. So I don't want to discount that, but yeah, that's kind of the process that I ran for my initial job.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think identifying your key differentiator, your superpower, if you have any sort of expertise in a vertical or a technical field, that can really be something that sets you apart. So thanks so much, Mark. And next I have a question for Kelly. So you recently raised your first fund, so congratulations, which is really cool. So what led you to pull the trigger on doing that, right? What kind of is your mission? What provided you your motivation to really get there? And then kind of like your thesis, how did you determine what that was going to look like?
Thank you so much, Patrick. And just to echo what both Mark and Sarah shared, I also took a fairly untraditional path into venture. I think that that's a common theme you hear from many people that are emerging, which just means new to the venture world. My early background was in mergers and acquisitions. And I spent a long time working in corporate, in a professional consulting role with large organizations, particularly around major changes within org structure. I've always been fascinated by solving problems. But what makes me untraditional? I'm a female, I'm lesbian identified, I'm a first generation college graduate. My family, I grew up public housing and free food poor in America. I never imagined my path in a professional career would be entrepreneurial. I thought that my path had to take a really structured, safe route. And that's how I ended up working historically in corporate. Why I raised 360 is I kept observing as I was working with companies that were going through change, whether that was startups that had received venture funding and were trying to grow to their next level, but were having change challenges. And I was going in and helping in an advisory capacity, or I was working with big companies, helping them kind of untangle sticky internal organizational design or customer dissatisfaction problems. I kept seeing structural failures that were about a dynamic of inequity and a lack of diversity within teams. And I thought, well, if there were more people performing intentional inclusion at the beginning of a company structure, there'd probably be less sort of growth structural problems at this stage in companies. Maybe we can help with that. And so I went out to two very incredible business leaders that are good friends, that are slightly more entrepreneurial than me, now my partners at 360 Venture Collective, Ann Metzger and Shelly Icona. And they said, let's solve this problem. Let's figure out how to write early checks to founders who've been historically underfunded, who are solving big gap problems that have been overlooked for too long. And can be really disruptive. And that's really the theme of Profit and Purpose that we came to. So we took a real humble forward approach. That's what we say internally. My friends tease me and call me Google. That's largely because I love a lot of different data. And so I know a little bit about a lot of things. So I would go out and read and learn about all of these different things and come back. And we decided to launch our fund where we felt we could have the greatest impact. So we write early stage checks, so pre-seed and seed, to venture scale founders, where we have the ability to help those founders hurdle invisible barriers. So classic funding dilemmas. How do they get fair follow-on funding after our round would be one example. So we invest in 4 key sectors: prop tech, fintech, health tech, and future of work. And we chose those sectors because we have the greatest expertise and advisory network. We have great partners from other venture funds who've agreed to meet our portfolio companies at that important A round of funding stage to help them overcome the obstacle that we've seen, not just getting that first check, but follow-on checks. And we're, like so many other emerging funds right now, raising and deploying capital simultaneously, which is a bit of a dance. So we originally started to raise, thinking we would launch with a much smaller fund than we're now raising. So we're targeting a $25 million fund, and we're raising under a 506c structure. And we're partnering with a lot of VCs. We're learning through an incredible array of programs that are available now in the market. And we're doing everything we can to build the ecosystem as we're raising and investing. Because we know that in order for all of us and our ecosystem to thrive, there need to be more people like us empowered to write checks to those founders that we want to support. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Kelly. And I love how you hearkened on the curiosity aspect, which to Marc's point as well. If you want to get into VC, you have to be either currently learning constantly or willing to take on a deluge of information from all angles. Next up, we have a question for Ben. So I know you mentioned in your intro that you were a founder, and I actually knew you back when you were a founder, and since then you've launched this new VC journey. So I'm curious to know what kind of made you do the transition, and what advice do you have for founders specifically who might consider getting into the VC world or as an angel investor, for example?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, like, it was really important when I was creating Chasing Rainbows to sort of understand the reason why, which is some of the big questions that we always ask as founders as well. And for me, it was all about, okay, well, how can I best continue to support the community, and particularly underrepresented founders? So I don't know if you guys know much about the facts around underrepresented founders, but if you start looking at raising capital, like, less than 1% of companies actually raise capital. But of that 1%, less than 15% are underrepresented founders. If you start breaking that down even more, you get down to the actual number of those who identify as LGBTQ+. And I start looking at that and going, like, how do we get more representation? How do we actually help people feel visible and seen? And so the idea behind Chasing Rainbows is specifically to invest in that pre-seed range for LGBTQ+ founders. And when I start looking at why I chose pre-seed, the reason why is because it's so, as a founder, I know this, it's hard to move from having a company, like having an idea, to actually having a product in place and having an MVP in market where you can actually, start selling and actually creating revenue and having a business. And so that very early stage is often the most crucial. And one of the challenges, particularly with some of the LGBTQ+ founders that I've invested in, is that they have, when they've come out, they've actually lost their friends and family. And so that means that they have no network they can actually raise from. And so I created Chasing Rainbows for that very reason, that we can be that friends and family for these these companies, at this early stage, which I think is really important. As a founder, I think one of the things that I like to consider what we offer as a fund is we offer smart money. And the best way to think about that is it's not just capital, but our team actually has been there before. We've actually been founders ourselves or entrepreneurs, and we have access to actually help people, and we've got ideas, and we've been there, we've got experience. And I think that that's one of the big things that a lot of founders need when they do move or as they build their company, is that experience from other people, that mentorship and advice. And so that's the thing that I like to think that we offer. And as a founder moving into the space as well, as every other person who's been a founder before can understand, like, you know, experience is the thing that actually helps. And so any advice that we can give in that space is definitely going to ensure that the success of our companies that we invest in as well. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Ben. I love that we're the friends and family for founders that don't necessarily have that. And I know that's oftentimes the case for underrepresented founders. And there's always, I mean, if you look at the stats for money going to underrepresented founders, it's truly abysmal. There was recently a report that came out for Latinx founders specifically that it actually investment went down in the past year, which really kind of hit the VC news cycle quite hard the past few weeks. If folks had a chance to read that, it's wonderfully depressing. Anyway, so just a reminder for everybody, if you have any questions, we're going to get into Q&A in a couple minutes. Put them in the Q&A function, not the chat function. So click on the Q&A button at the bottom. You can type in your question and we'll get to them after a few final questions for the panel. And I already see some, so thanks to those that have populated them there. So now we kind of have gone through each of your individual journeys a bit. I'm curious, and I'll open this up to everybody. What barriers do you see for LGBTQ+/queer individuals, perhaps even broadening that a bit to include all underrepresented groups in the VC community, and how would you recommend, or how yourself have you been able to circumvent these barriers? So like actionable pieces that the attendees can take away and kind of go forth and conquer ideally. Maybe I'll start with you, Sarah, since love to hear from you.
Sure. So, I mean, to start off, breaking into VC is an incredibly difficult journey, I think, for anybody. It is a very kind of in-group mentality within venture capital, and that just gets exacerbated for anybody who is in an out-group in any way. And I think for the LGBTQ plus community, what makes it more difficult is when we talk about the populations that we work with at Diversity VC, there's visible diversity where I can identify with somebody because they're a woman, and because I feel comfortable asking them, you know, what has your experience been as a woman in venture capital? I can see that and kind of make an assumption. That doesn't exist quite as much for the LGBTQ plus community unless somebody is very vocally out. And so but I do think that there is value in the community. And I do also want to draw a distinction between, for myself, and I don't know if others would agree with this, the distinction between community and network. VCs will tell you that network is hugely important, that you have to keep networking, you have to keep finding people. And it is incredibly important. You have to find people that are going to give you deals and find people that help you learn. But there are people that you meet along the way who will just be very transactional and are not really part of your personal community, and people that want to lift you up and help you do better. And so finding the folks that are really supportive of you and that are willing to first accept you for who you are, but also like push you forward and challenge you is something that takes a little bit of time. But from my personal experience, I realized that I had to really be the one to put that on myself. So sending cold emails to people or cold LinkedIn messages, I learned to not be ashamed of just reaching out to as many people as possible, because my hit rate was not going to be super high, but it wasn't going to be zero. And then just, it's kind of the law of big numbers, enough of those conversations, enough of that kind of intentional community building. I had plenty of horrible conversations with people that I was like, I can't believe this person has like a good name in this industry because they've just said the most awful things. But I had equally as many great conversations that were exactly the opposite of that. And those people are still friends and co-investors and all of that today. So I would say it's my kind of lesson learned was be shameless about kind of putting yourself out there, and you will find the people that are meant to be part of your community, but you really have to do the work to build it yourself.
Yeah, I agree with what Sarah was saying there around community, and you know, like I think the other thing as well is that, you know, the best people to help you be successful are people who are actually invested, like emotionally as well as financially, in your success. And I think that as an investor, it's not a short-term investment, it's a long-term relationship. And so you want to ensure that the success of the companies that you invest in, and part of that is finding, you know, things that you're passionate about, and ensuring that you're going to stay passionate about the problems that people are solving as well. And so I think that that's definitely an element of that community.
Excellent. Kelly, Mark? Kelly?
I'd love to chime in. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Fred and Sarah both just shared. I think I'm going to emphasize even more what Sarah said about the difference between family or friends and family, and what we would call community, and the network. As somebody who grew up in a community, I grew up in public housing. I didn't have a lot of people who even well-intentioned could or had the power to open doors for me in my network. And so the path out for me was really intentional from the beginning. I had to model behavior that I saw successful people doing. And so for me, even as somebody who came out at 14 years old as a lesbian, my personal and my professional lives were very distinct. So I was out at work, I was out in school, but I modeled the behavior of my heterosexual peers that were successful. And that modeling behavior allowed me to get ahead professionally in a corporate world, which was something that I embraced. But it wasn't until launching 360 Venture Collective where my personal and professional really became integrated. And candidly, that's where I found real resonance in my work. I call it work and life alignment. I work almost all of the time now, and I've never been happier to be working so much, because my whole self is in work. That doesn't always mean my conversations are easy, and it doesn't mean every interaction I have as I'm vulnerably putting myself out there with investors yields the result I want. But there's never hiding of my identity, and the founders that I'm connecting with, the people that are backing, that are choosing to write checks on behalf of our fund, they're inspired by the vision and they're emboldened by the vision, and we're in a relationship together, using the word that Ben said. So don't allow your community to hold you back from your dreams, and don't allow your network to not let you bring your whole self to the opportunity. Because when you bring both things, when you have that work and life alignment, that authenticity will shine through, and it will make the path easier.
Excellent. Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I love all the points that have been made. I think the one thing that I'll add that's been inspiring for me to see lately is that there is still kind of the unfortunate nature that a lot of the largest buckets of money are sitting kind of behind the desks of very traditional investors in the Bay Area on the West Coast. It's kind of undeniable that the seat of that capital is still, in places that maybe haven't completely embraced, inclusion and equity and diversity. But I really think what's been inspiring lately is to see the kind of explosion of, I think really more like human funds. I don't know, I think funds where it's the stories behind them are human, they're investing in people, and it's, they're willing to look beyond a lot of what I think that traditional investors have kind of focused on historically. So that makes me really excited. And I think for me, thinking of it from the perspective of someone trying to get into VC, it is making it, at least I think, a little bit easier to find a fund where your superpower is matched to what they're looking for, right? It's not like you have to come from the traditional investment banking, PE background to then jump into, a Sequoia or an A16Z or something. The reality is there are more and more $10 to $20 million early stage funds where you can kind of identify with your story with the person who's leading that fund. It's maybe more of an entrepreneurial journey, but you can get your feet wet and start getting a track record and start kind of getting involved in the community. So that's really what inspires me lately, I think.
Awesome. Now I'd love to ask one final question to the panel. before we get into the Q&A, and it's what next steps should the attendees take, right? So they're curious about VC, they want to learn more about VC potentially to break into it. Where should they go? Well, we have a resource slide for the end of the presentation, but I'm curious from each of your perspectives, like if I'm an attendee, what should I do next in order to start officially knocking down that wall and getting into a VC role, investor role? Kelly, I can start with you.
So I did 3 things that I highly recommend. I attended a program run by KF Techstars based on Brad Feld. It's designed initially for founders, but it also has a VC lens. It's a free program online. My partners and I all attended together, and it gave me really great foundational insight around fund structure. Brad Feld has been sort of at the forefront of intentional and transparent VC space, and it's the KF Techstars program online. I really enjoyed that program. I also got involved in VC Twitter, and I know that's a little funny. I actually didn't have a Twitter following. I spent no time on Twitter before launching into the world of VC, but I've learned so much from like-minded VCs in the VC Twitter world, from Twitter Spaces with Lolita Taub and Matt Conwell. It's just really incredible to see them. And then I also spend a ton of time reading data from a variety of data sources. I'm not going to advertise any one of them, but find your favorite investor data sources and look at how other funds that have been successful, that have the kind of returns that you want, design their investment strategies. Just like there are a wide variety of successful business models, there are a wide variety of strategies around fund thesis and investment stage. So find your niche through an exploration of what other people have been doing.
Yeah, and definitely, develop your opinion and your thesis early on, so you kind of get an idea of where you want to focus. Anyone else want to chime in, or Ben?
Oh yeah, sorry, Sarah, you also okay. I did Venture University or VC University as part of UC Berkeley, and I think for me that really gave me a great background in sort of understanding, okay, well, what are some of the basics that I need to know about, particularly around like term sheets and things like that. The other thing that I did as well was just started investing as an angel. It sunk my teeth in. It allowed me to start understanding, okay, well, what are the reasons people are raising? Why are they raising? How are they raising? And sort of really start getting some traction and proof points. Because I think that's the thing as a fund manager that's really important, that you have proof points, because people aren't going to invest in your fund if you've got nothing to show for it. So you actually need to show that you've been there before, you put in some hard work, you've got some returns, and those returns show that you've got the skills to be able to pick a good company and actually understand how you can help them go and grow into being a successful company that exits, be that IPO or being acquired. And then the other thing that I did when I started the VC fund was actually just start reaching out to investors and having a conversation with them to ask them their advice on what things they look for. Like, how do they choose a company they invest in? What's important to them? How do they make their investment decisions? Because once you start learning how to make investment decisions, you can then start implementing that into your own angel investing, which then hopefully then allows you to then start building into more of a traditional fund as well, which is the path I've chosen.
I'll jump in really quick, Ben, because I think what you mentioned, kind of building a portfolio or a track record. I think I want to, from the perspective of someone who's looking to get into VC, so joining a fund, not necessarily starting a fund, I think it's also important to take even a wider lens on what the notion of a portfolio is. I think I've seen folks have a lot of success, using a portfolio of projects. They might not be angel investments, but maybe it's I advise or I helped a friend who's starting a company think about their strategy for deploying their first product to market, right? And this is like a brief summary. I helped them build a slide deck, right? I think this whole industry is kind of like a show me the proof type of situation, right? So if you can show up to an interview or to kind of a conversation with an investor, if you're looking to join a fund, and say, hey, like I've dabbled in the operating experience side of things. I've dabbled in working on some projects, and I've been tracking and recording it, right? It's I think that can be really powerful. So just like a quick thought on broadening even beyond just like a personal portfolio of angel investments.
I think I agree with Mark wholeheartedly. I think we've also seen candidates who come in when I was working at a fund who have like their mock portfolios. They don't have the capital to invest themselves, but they're like, these are the companies that I really love, and here's why. That is so meaningful for us to be able to come in and say, okay, well, why did you pick that company? Why do you think this one is interesting? What do you think about that founder? And so it's possible to do without having kind of the means to go about it yourself, but it takes time. And I would echo Kelly's point that like I remember when I was trying to break in as an associate, I like signed up for a Twitter account. I like tried to start a blog, and then I was like, this is just not me. I hate this. Like, I hate being on all this social media all the time. And it felt very disingenuous. And so when I was going to talk to people and saying like, oh, you can look at my blog, I was like, that's not who I am. So find the thing that you are really passionate about. Like this, if you are going to enjoy this job, it means that you feel really strongly about something, whether it's a product or a business model or a person, and go and talk about that. It's going to come across as very genuine and very powerful to the people. And then I would say the most important thing is just kind of keeping yourself at top of mind. So the people that I think of and am able to help the most as they're trying to break into VC are the ones who are sending me emails every 2 months or every 3 months that are saying, hey, here's what I've been working on in the interim. And they're like still in school, or they have had a 30-year career and they're just like trying to keep me updated on the things that they think are relevant that I might find interesting. If I talk to you once and then I never hear from you again, it's going to be really hard for me to say, oh, here's all of the analyst or associate jobs that I saw get posted over the course of the last week. You can find those online. So really be on top of, like, if there are people that you connect with, stay on top of being connected to them, because that is really what's going to put you in the right position. It's, people talk about being in the right place at the right time. If you put yourself in the right place all the time can eventually come along.
Very reassuring to hear that someone else struggles with Twitter and blogging in the VC world. But I think you make a really good point, which is I think I've found that my strengths are more around the one-on-one conversations with folks and, you know, nerding out over the tech that people are building, or like going really deep with, yeah, I think again, you made a really good point.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to this is specifically breaking into an existing fund as an analyst associate, something like that. If you want to put yourself in the position of the fund who's potentially going to hire you, right? You need to be able to bring to the table a superpower, basically, something that's going to set you apart and bring in deal flow specifically. So if you have, I love the idea of a fantasy portfolio. Which actually a fund was recently launched of somebody who started on a Twitter account, literally doing fantasy football type activities for startups. And because he got such notoriety because of that, he was able to raise a fund. But really getting into the due diligence process, you have access to these startups, and the idea that I believe Mark mentioned and some other folks reiterated, having a mentor portfolio, that's really how I was able to break into VC. I started working with startups and providing insight around how to different communities they could break into, go-to-market strategy, these types of things. And you could learn quickly and just be, if you don't have that experience per se to provide to a startup, you can still learn on the fly while advising a startup, just being that sounding board for them. And then they fall into your advising portfolio, and you could share that with a fund if you want to differentiate yourself, if you're looking to apply. Just so put yourself in the seat of a fund and make sure that you understand what they're going to want from you.
And I think I have two more things. One is continuing on this theme of like, what type of broad portfolio of things can you bring to the table? I think one aspect around creating a mock portfolio that can really help with breaking into VC is it helps you exercise the language of talking about investments and talking about funds and the decision making, right? So if you create a mock portfolio of startups and maybe you have an informational call with someone who's in VC who's willing to chat with you about the startups that you're interested in, you can kind of pick up on the language that they're using to talk about the rounds that are being raised, the valuations, the terms. Those are things that'll make you more fluid as you go into the interview process with an investor, I think. And then that also brings me to something that I think I've heard in all fund interviews, at least going in as an analyst or associate, is what's one startup that you're tracking right now, and why are you tracking it? Why would you invest in it, like Sarah mentioned? And another one is some variation on which one of our portfolio companies are you most interested in, why? Or if you were to not invest in a portfolio company of ours, which one would it be and why? They're just trying to test your understanding of, like, can you reason out the business case of a company and have some sort of differentiated understanding of it.
That's a great point. Thanks, Mark. And I've seen those questions all the time in interview processes. Great. So now to the Q&A. I'd love to ask some of these questions. And first is from Jim. So coming from a diverse background in entrepreneurship, how is the best way to leverage the entrepreneurship piece specifically, with no direct finance industry experience, how to leverage the entrepreneurship piece to get into a VC role?
I would say probably first thing you want to do is look for funds that are run by former entrepreneurs. I did not come from an entrepreneur background, and I found it equally as difficult to get them to be interested in me because I didn't have the entrepreneur background. And so finding somebody who may have a similar background to you and reaching out to them about, and I would say it's always better to reach out with a question about something specific. Maybe it's about one of their companies. Maybe it's about an article that you read. People love talking about themselves. If you read something that they've written on Twitter or a blog post that they wrote and you said, hey, I found this really interesting, I would love to hear more about it. It's always going to be more, or kind of get more responses than, hey, I'm looking to break into VC. Can you give me advice? And so just finding somebody who kind of matches the profile of what you think you want to be, and then finding your way to kind of weasel into talking to them. Even if it's a cold email, it's always a higher chance of success.
I just want to echo something Mark said earlier. Mark shared about USP. What's your unique sales proposition, or what makes you uniquely differentiated in the approach? And I think what Sarah just said is so true. Finding operator funds, operator-led funds is helpful. But also, if you do have more of an interest in a different fund, then talking about the value that it could bring to that fund to have an operator-led perspective. So these are the founder challenges I think you might be missing. I noticed 3 of your portcos just had a down round. I think that it might be because of a hiring trend. Here's how I fixed it in the companies I worked with. I'd love to talk with you about the value I could bring. If you're focused on the value you bring back to the person that you're trying to talk with, it's going to be significantly easier to get the meeting than if you're trying to take value from them.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point, which is you can double whammy it if you're introing yourself with an ask on something specific and valuable to the person you're reaching out to, and it's coming through some sort of mutual connection or warm introduction, right? That's how you can almost guarantee that that person will give you time on their calendar.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for all those responses. I feel like that just came across as a cold response to those beautiful responses. So here's from an anonymous attendee. So being from outside the VC community, how do you just get past the reception desk or gatekeepers? I know we talked about LinkedIn outreach and things like that, but is there any more suggestions that you might have just to get over that first hurdle if you don't come from an existing experience level?
I'll jump in. I definitely used LinkedIn a lot, and I set up automations that allowed me to sort of have an outreach and then a follow-up message. And then I literally, anybody who wanted or was interested to speak to me or wanted to help me would be able to book directly into my calendar. So I definitely highly recommend different approaches, not just trying your traditional email approach, but looking at LinkedIn, looking at Twitter. Any way that you can capture somebody's engagement allows you then to open up the door for a conversation.
I would just add in value to one of their portcos. So it can be hard to go direct to a venture partner. It can be challenging because a lot of people are trying to get their attention, but their portcos have their attention. So if you're bringing value to one of their portcos, you create a relationship and you help them make that warm intro, coming back to what Marc just said, that's going to be a significantly easier way because it's a double win. They're going to want to help their portco, and they'll know that you took the effort to know who their portcos are. So you're already differentiated.
I think that's also true for somebody who's coming for the last question. If you're coming from an operational background, like you probably know several people who have been venture backed. And so that is the best way into, like, a VC is always going to take a call from one of their founders that says, I have somebody that's really smart, you should meet them. But I think another path that could be taken is it's called outreach, but I used a lot of like things that I had produced that weren't necessarily related to venture necessarily. Like I did research in college that I thought was interesting, and I just like sent it out to some people. So, and I didn't want to recreate anything. And there's probably a lot of students now who are like sending their papers to VCs. And if they're doing that, I apologize. That's probably because I told them to. But it was really useful for just like having a reason to stay in front of somebody and say, I think this is interesting. I think that you should take a look at it. But the last thing really is VCs are always looking for deal flow. And so if you have companies that you see that haven't raised yet, that have raised but are still kind of under the radar, or that you think are overlooked, send them, because I absolutely am going to want to look at, like, it might not be a fit and be filter correctly for the fund that you send it to. Don't just blast every person that you want to talk to about a job with the same company and the same spiel. Be selective about, like, I think this is a fit for you because you focus on this stage, this type of company, etc. It's very obvious when you send like a copy pasted email. So be precise and be selective, but I'm always going to take the time to read that and respond versus somebody that BCCs me on something.
Absolutely. One question that I'll actually respond to quickly from my own experience is, what is an operator role in a VC fund? What does that mean? Because that was in the poll question. And this is actually a good entryway into VC. Is if you are looking to break into VC in a larger fund, consider entering in as somebody in events, or someone who manages the accelerator program, or somebody who manages portfolio or external relationships. You don't have to break in as an investor off the bat, right? You can get into a large fund in any number of other roles based on your experience as a founder, or maybe in corporate, or whatever you studied in undergrad, grad school, etc. And then build your knowledge in VC while you're there. And then you could ideally transition over to an investor role. So just another thing to keep in mind, which is exactly kind of what I did.
Yeah, I'll double down on that. Smaller funds are more of an entrepreneurial journey. So I think you would want to align more with that kind of story and interaction if you're trying to get into a smaller fund. But larger funds tend to have big platform teams. So the teams that help their portfolio companies with relationships to LPs or potential strategic collaborations, marketing, legal, all those sorts of things. Those teams are super valuable. And if you can find a way in on that side, they're in constant communication with the investing team. It's like, so Patrick is really correct on that, I would say.
So many different routes. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time for questions. Could you get the final slides up, Alex? Our trusty behind the scenes start out rep. But yeah, we wanted to share some resources with you, which are generally, I pulled the panelists. This is not the full list. There's 1,000 different pieces of information out there, but check out these things for professional development. Obviously, Future VC, VC Unlocked at 500 startups. I know it has a high price tag, but they offer full scholarships. VC University, which Ben went to Venture Deals, which is a free program, which is part of Venture Deals, the book, which is next. Pipeline Angels has a good angel education program, which is a good way to grow your portfolio if you have the money to actually invest. There's so many professional development courses. It's become quite inundated. So do your research, and you can find plenty of free courses on Udacity and different education things. These books, Venture Deals, I should have brought over my version of Venture Deals. I've read it, I think, 4 times. It's just a really good overview of the VC ecosystem for both startups and for VCs. My dog has eaten the cover. It's like in shambles. It is filled with notes and things like that. I love that book. And then there's a book called Break into VC, How to Break into Venture Capital, which I read way back when, before I even got my first job. And it has some pretty useful tips. And then blogs and more. The John Gannon blog actually compiles all VC jobs, or it does a really good job. And it has several articles and interviews with folks on how they broke into VC. So it's a really good resource. It looks like an outdated kind of blog when you see it, but it's chock full of really great information. And then the startupinvc.com has a great job board and a VC ecosystem there as well. And then Mark just added confluence.vc. You'll see them in the chat, but there's so many different things. I did want to also mention these 2 upcoming events. So we have Presenting with Impact, which is happening tomorrow, the key to accelerating your personal brand. This is specifically pertinent to what we've chatted about today. If you want to start growing your personal brand to differentiate yourself in the vast field of candidates trying to break into VC, could be great for you to be a part of that event. And then on this 22nd of February, we have Successful Sales and Marketing Practices for Introverts. So if you consider yourself more on the introverted side of things, check that event as well. And we're going to have a ton of great events and panels throughout the year. So remain involved. Hopefully you're on our mailing list. If you're founders, we have specific content for founders, investors, or folks looking to break into VC. Expect a lot more from us and our board this year. And obviously, before we go, I wanted to thank our amazing panelists once again. I know Kelly, Ben, Sarah, and Mark, it's been great chatting with you. And I don't know if we have time for any final remarks. I don't have a clock. But any final pieces of advice, like one sentence?
Yeah, I think I tried to respond to this one, but we had a few open questions at the end there. I think something that I want to highlight is that Startout is like an incredibly open organization. So if you're a founder looking for help or support, you can LinkedIn message, us, the Startout team. I think everyone's open to help. So if you're a founder looking for resources, this isn't the end. We're all reachable.
Remember, we said LinkedIn. Check us all out. Anyone else? Kelly, any final parting thoughts?
Just dare to chase your why. If you want to do it, there are resources out there. Be emboldened and find the support that'll back you when you have those moments of doubt.
Excellent. Sarah?
I say keep your confidence up. It definitely shows. And so coming in confident and knowing what you're talking about and why you're talking about it is always going to pay dividends.
Finally, and Ben.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said. It's just about getting out there and giving it a go. It's that whole entrepreneurial approach, right? You've got to do the same thing when you're investing or wanting to move into venture capital as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge mindset of entrepreneurship in the VC community as well. So it's a fun little ecosystem to join, and I recommend everybody do it. So connect with us all, stay involved in Startout, and we'll hopefully see you all in the VC rooms in the near future.
A quick thank you for Patrick. Great job,
Yes.
Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.